Greetings to all you budding tacticians out there. I am Don951, and you are watching the first installment of my Fire Emblem 5 Paragon Mode 0% Girls playthrough. I will be joined in this endeavor, as always, by my good friend and co-commentator, Mekkah.
Hi.
So the purpose of this introduction video, like the rest of the introduction videos, is to explain the intricacies of this game for the edification of players who may not have played this game, in order to make this playthrough a more enjoyable watch. So, FE5, also known as Fire Emblem Thracia 776, was released in 1999 for the Super Nintendo. It's the second and final game of the series to take place in the setting of the continent Yggdrasil. The events of FE5 take place in between chapters 6 and 8 of FE4, so unfortunately, if you haven't played it before, this playthrough is going to spoil a couple of things about that game, although I think it's worth spoiling yourself. Just my personal opinion, although you may also just want to quickly play through FE4. Additionally, FE5 was the last game in the series directed by Shozo Kaga, who was the original founder of the Fire Emblem franchise, and he left Intelligent Systems after developing this game. So it does have a bit of a different flavor from the more contemporary Fire Emblem games.
FE5 was not released outside of Japan, and even within Japan it saw a very limited release, so it's one of the lesser played FE games. It has a reputation of being really hard to the point of being bullshit. It's especially punishing for blind players, which is why I like to call it Nintendo hard. There are some things in the game that it doesn't prepare you for, and as a result it's more difficult than if you would know some things beforehand. So this game has a lot of new mechanics that returned in future entries. Some of them are Fog of War, which means you cannot see your enemies properly. Gaiden chapters, which are optional chapters that you can go to if you fulfill certain objectives in the previous chapter. And this game features stealing, which lets you steal just about anything in this game, even weapons, as long as you have sufficient speed and constitution to do so. Speaking of which, this game also features constitution for the first time, also known as build. It's used to offset weapon weight when calculating attack speed, and it's used for rescuing. And there's also a growth rate for constitution in this game, which is the only time this ever happened in the FE series. This is also the game that first featured rescuing, as well as giving and taking other units to one another. In order to rescue someone, your constitution needs to be higher than the target's constitution, and in Fire Emblem for the Game Boy Advance, when you rescue someone, your speed and skill are halved, but in this game, every single stat of yours except for luck is cut in half, so the penalty is much bigger. And in addition, there's a penalty for movement if the rescuee has more than half the constitution of the rescuer, so that makes it even more severe. Mounted units, they have a big bonus. They are treated as if they have 20 constitution, but mounted units cannot be rescued by others. And then there's also some mechanics that are exclusive to FE5 that haven't really returned later on.
Right, so the first mechanic that pretty much any player will think about when they talk about FE5 is the capture mechanic, and the best way to describe capturing is kind of like forcibly rescuing an enemy or someone of a different affiliation. And in order to capture an enemy, because enemies are not going to willingly let themselves get taken by you, if the enemy is armed, you kind of have to kill them first. That is, you have to reduce your HP to 0, and when you are attempting to capture an enemy, your stats are cut in half as if you were already rescuing them. So you have to kill the enemy while suffering stat penalties, and then you'll successfully capture them. Now for enemies that are defenseless, for example they're unarmed or they don't have any weapons that can counterattack you if they have them equipped, then you can simply threaten them and then they will willingly go into your rescuing state. So enemies will use the capture mechanic against the player fairly often. Most enemies will try to capture at any given opportunity, especially defenseless units. And this is frustrating for novice players because they're used to being able to leave their cleric, exposed for one turn because they can survive a hit. But in FE5, an enemy is just going to run up to them, capture them, and then automatically take all of their weapons. But for more experienced players, it provides a way to manipulate the AI in a really reliable, controlled fashion. When you capture an enemy, you can also take their items. Unfortunately, it requires an extra action. Basically, you are allowed to trade with them, and then after you take away the items that you need, you can release them and they disappear from the map. Other mechanics that are exclusive to FE5 are Fatigue, Pursuit Critical, and Escape. We will talk about those as they appear later in the playthrough. One last notable FE5 specific mechanic is movement stars. Units with movement stars have a low percent chance of gaining an extra movement and action at the end of their first action of any given turn. The highest movement star activation rate is 25% for select player units. Certain enemy units also have movement stars. Because the activation rate is so low, in the player's hands, they're not really consistently to be relied upon, and in the enemy's hands, they can really screw up an otherwise very reliable strategy. So because of this, they're one of the mechanics in this game that I absolutely truly hate. To demonstrate the consistency of some of my strategies, I've edited out movement stars for all player units, but I have still kept them in for enemy units that had them.
Something else that can increase reliability is the use of leadership stars. Some units have some of these, and each leadership star gives plus 3% hit and avoid to all allied units on the map. Some player units have these, and then some enemies have them as well, mostly bosses, and that can make a bit of a variation in how tough a map is. There's some other mechanics like this that have been present in previous Fire Emblem games. Examples of this are status. The main difference here is that they linger, so the only way to get rid of them is to restore staff. There's dismounting, which we'll explain later. There's a skill system that's kind of like the one in Awakening, but a lot simpler. And there's Crusader Scrolls, which are kind of like the Star Shards from FE3. So Crusader Scrolls increase a unit's growth rates when they're in their inventory. Different scrolls give different boosts to different stats. They are edited out for this playthrough because this is 0% growth, but they have a secondary effect. They negate critical hits from enemies when they're in an inventory. So they are basically like a bunch of iron runes, which is very nice because it increases reliability a lot for this playthrough.
FE5 also makes several subtle but substantial deviations from standard Fire Emblem core mechanics. Two of these deviations have to do with hit rates. This is the last game in the series to not have the true hit mechanic that was introduced in Fire Emblem 6. What this means is that, for example, in later Fire Emblem games, if you attack an enemy in the game system you have 90 displayed hit, your actual chance to hit is around 99%. In Fire Emblem 5, what you see is what you get. So if you have 90 hit, then you actually have 90% chance to hit. The implication of this is that we have a pretty high threshold for a really reliable strategy, whereas in a later game, if I had 90 hit, I'd be pretty satisfied with it. In this game, I would probably want to have 99 hit as much as possible. Unfortunately, based on circumstances, I'm not always going to have that much hit. Now, speaking of having 99 hit, in Fire Emblem 5, hit is capped at 99 and floored at 1. Flooring at 1 doesn't matter so much, but hit being kept at 99 means that even in circumstances where you would normally have 100 hit and something would be guaranteed, it's not actually guaranteed. You still have a 1% chance to miss. That will happen over the course of a playthrough, and it will make the player mad.
In most Fire Emblem games, there is a magic stat and a resistance stat. Magic determines how much damage you do with magic attacks, and resistance determines how well you take magic attacks. In this game, these two stats are merged into one stat called magic. There's also a slight change to how much damage a critical hit does. In most games, a critical hit simply means you do triple damage. In this game, your attacking power, which is your weapon might plus your strength or magic, is multiplied by 2 when you get a critical hit, and then defense is subtracted. So you do a little bit different damage with a critical hit than you would in other games.
There are two subtle but notable other differences in this game when compared to future Fire Emblem games. One of these differences involves a rescuing function. Normally, a unit can only use the give or take command once during his turn and is not allowed to use it an infinite number of times, but in this game, a unit is allowed to use the give and take commands an infinite number of times as long as he stays in the same place. Additionally, a unit can also use a trade command with any number of adjacent or units that the unit is currently carrying. The combination of these two little differences, though they appear like they don't matter a whole lot at first, they actually enable a whole lot of rescue and trade chain strategies that we normally wouldn't be able to do.
Usually we do these 0% growth runs on the hardest difficulty possible. This playthrough is on Paragon mode, which is actually an easier difficulty. Paragon mode doubles EXP gain for all units, as if they had the skill Paragon. Units that actually have the skill Paragon have their EXP quadrupled. The reason we're doing this is not because we really need the level ups themselves, because we're doing 0% growth, so it doesn't actually help in that regard. But it improves reliability, because there's some units that we need to get to level 10 in order to get them to promote. But to gain a lot of EXP, sometimes there's like unreliable ways to do that, and we don't want to resort to those. So instead what we do is we double EXP gain for everyone, and then we make the strategy a lot more reliable.
With the criteria for this playthrough, as always, I'm trying to achieve lowest turn count while also recruiting everybody, and it turns out that that overlaps with the ranking requirements for Fire Emblem 5. In this game, the ranking system assigns a player a triple S rank, which is the highest rank, if the player finishes the game in fewer than 180 turns with all the characters recruited and alive. And as I mentioned before, to demonstrate consistency of my strategies and to stay true to the spirit of 0% growths, I've completely removed movement stars for player units, completely removed growth rate bonuses for Crusader Scrolls, and I will also be doing this playthrough on Paragon mode. In terms of our commentary, we'll try to use the localized names as much as possible, and this may conflict with the names that were used in the translation patch that most players are more familiar with. We are also not using the translation patch because it looks pretty unprofessional, the quality is not that great, and it also has some bugs that I don't want to deal with. So unfortunately you're going to have to deal with the moon runes, but if you are at least a little Fire Emblem savvy, you should be able to understand most of everything that's going on with the assistance of our commentary. So that's it for this video. We will see you in Chapter 1.
See ya.